Marc, I'm going to pass across to yourself, invite you to introduce yourself and perhaps pass any commentary from your angle as to tools, tips, tricks and techniques as to how we can make ESG a reality within raw materials. So Marc, who are you and what do you reckon?
Great, thank you, Sarah. So my name is Marc Borbas. I work with a company called Glacier Resource Innovation Group, and we're a combination of a media, training, and hiring solution, essentially, for the mining industry. So one of the brands some of you might recognize that I'm responsible for is EduMine. So we provide online and self-paced learning into the mining industry. And the reason Sarah and I got connected is she's taught a couple of courses for us in the past, and we're getting a lot more demand, obviously, for ESG education. And it's kind of interesting because I think we're at this moment where it's crossing over from something that, you know, compliance people and investors were interested in, but it was kind of confined to a small part of the industry to some degree, you know, at least thinking about it as an integrated whole. Now we're seeing this moment where it's beginning to become part of culture, or people are trying to figure out how do we build it into our culture to think about these things in an integrated way. So it was really interesting going through all the dialogues. I've got tons of comments and questions and thoughts on this, but Sarah, maybe I'll hand back to you and let you kind of guide how you want to walk through this.
But I'm going to ping it straight back at you, Marc, and say, yeah,
right.
What were some of those items that resonated in your mind?
Sure. So a couple of things was, I think, especially early on. So I'm on the west coast of Canada, so I joined as early as I possibly could, about 7 a.m. this morning. But there's a lot of language around opportunity. And I'm at my heart a marketer. So when I think about opportunity, it's a word that always kind of gets me interested and excited. And one of the speakers made the comment about we have to protect the opportunity. And I thought that's a really interesting language and way of thinking about things is, you know, because in business terms, we always think about a window of opportunity. We talk about missed opportunities, great opportunities, unique opportunities. But I think that the discussion that we're having today is a lot about what is the opportunity, not only from a company, but a community and a stakeholder perspective, and how do we actually describe it and think about it as a holistic opportunity. That was one of the things that really kind of came through to me, and it was a linkage point between all the sessions, is we tend to think of opportunities so narrowly, right? There are X tons of ore that we're interested in. We can recover this much in terms of mineral product from this, but what about thinking about the opportunity in terms of community impact and everything else we can do through this project? And how do we broaden that definition of opportunity? I thought that was kind of a neat thread that pulled through for me.
Brilliant. I really love that. And in terms of that, you know, kind of looking at that thread of opportunity, I don't know, Caroline, if you would agree with what Marc's just said, or would you counteract what he said?
No, I completely agree. I do. I think there is that kind of, it's such a force now looking at ESG and taking those opportunities, but also making sure those opportunities are taken in such a way where they can protect your business interests, but also protect the people. For example, if it's mining, protecting those who are most vulnerable and those who are going to experience the most change from these large scale projects.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Caroline. Marc, did you have a number of other threads that you want to put on the table? And then maybe as a panel, we can discuss them.
Yeah, I think the other one that jumped out for me was, and I think it first came up in Minerva's presentation, was the notion of making it safe to fail. And it's so interesting. We're talking about ESG risks, which nobody wants to mess anything up. And yet we're talking about how do we make it safe for people to fail? So I think that dichotomy was really interesting to me. How do you handle those polar situations? You know, do you do simulations, or what do you do to help people get comfortable that, yeah, there are risks here, but we can explore, we can actually get into this a little bit. And so that was kind of one that stood out for me. And I'd love to hear some thoughts on how we make it safe to fail when we're dealing with really big risks.
So Rob, you know that I'm going to come to you on that. Rob, safe to fail?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think my point would be, and I think this relates perhaps to the previous point, this is all relative. You know, one person's opportunity is perhaps another person's threat, and so making sure that we see all of these things through different perspectives rather than just our own is absolutely critical. And so I suppose in some ways I'd apply that also to the concept of failure. Creating those safe to fail spaces. So for a company, that may mean, well, we'll put a certain amount of money into this project, and actually, if we don't get anything out of it at the end, well, we've lost that money. Well, that's, that may well fit within their safe to fail space. But actually, what happens potentially within that, from a community perspective, may be much more catastrophic. And therefore, so again, these safe to fail, the concept is very sound. It's experimentation. It's accepting that we cannot automatically know the answers. Context is everything, so we have to trial within these spaces, but making sure that failure is seen from lots of different perspectives, or perhaps even better, not succeeding rather than failure. But we all have to realize there are red lines for companies, for communities, and so it's finding those spaces that we can experiment in.
So I guess it's working out what are the areas in which you can afford a little bit of failure, and which are the areas where you absolutely can't. And so getting those sort of tolerance levels in a way. Is that correct, Rob?
Yeah, I think absolutely. But the only thing I would add to that is just making sure you don't just see it through your own perspective.
Yeah.
Whatever that space is that you're working in, other people may have a different interpretation of success and failure. So, it needs to be done, again, sort of in this collaborative sense, rather than just in, well, this is what makes sense from our perspective.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Rob. Epi, I see you very politely put your hand up, so we'll come to you next, and then I'm going to go to Amy.
About failure and separating failure and from a risk perspective, and failure and contingencies or emergencies from a physical aspect. It's all about if you know that there is a risk, for example, tailings, there will always be a risk, obviously. There's a heap leach, there's always a risk. However, the follow through on the, you design, but once you design and you construct, you follow through, you keep monitoring, you keep doing studies, you keep quality control, and everything has to be constructed and operated towards closure. So it's, you never put your finger off. So the chances for an actual contingency are very slim if you are paying attention, if you understand what you're doing. And that means at all times and at all levels. I've seen tailings designs where they extract rock, and that becomes part of the storage facility. That hole that they make, and the tailings becomes its own borrow pit for the construction. And that is a very practical design. It makes a lot of sense. It's very safe. However, when you're walking right next to the construction site and understanding at all times, at all levels, you realize that they are going deeper than the design. Why? Because they will be able to store more, which is not an added risk, but it modifies other stuff. It will mean that you need to have deeper monitoring wells, deeper piezometers. You need to expand and modify your hydrogeological model. It has other items that I'm not saying it's bad. It's just you need to update everything, and you need to understand not just your design, but your construction and your reality at all times, at all levels, throughout the life of mine, throughout the entire life cycle. So it's and about and that's preventing contingency. And about failure, it's we can think about let's stop the project. It's a no-go. That can be considered a failure. Again, the problem is not the problem. It's how we look at the problem. It's just it may mean that it's just not attractive for you. You're not willing to take that chance. But with the proper information, with the proper documentation, someone else may see a different. They will come up with the solution, or they said the solution is the same. It just takes too much time, and I do have the time. I'll do it. When you don't understand, when you don't follow through, when you don't have the data at all levels with everybody that is involved, that's when you are doomed for contingencies or failure, etc. One single example that I think that it represents the entire communication system and different languages. I have about 20 guys extracting water for agricultural land, and there is no water, no additional water in that area. And a big mine comes and they start drilling, and they find that there is significant more water than was previously thought about. So they expand, and it's not an overexploited aquifer anymore because there is water. They found that water. So they get new water concessions, and down the road, they start getting complaints and conflicts because the other guys don't have water. I say, I have the paper, I have the science. There is lots of water. There's no way that I consume that water and that you have consumed that water. There is water. Yeah, but there's a big difference. They have 50-meter wells. You have a 350 well. You're talking about different, you did not follow through.
So
There is water.
I guess with that then as well, so it's a case here where we've got in potential areas, it's that preparation to fail, but actually preparation to change as well, especially as we get to grips with actually what our context truly is and our understanding of that ecosystem, the environment, etc., improves, and actually our management actions or our ways of addressing it probably need to change with that. I'm going to come on to Amy now just to get your insight on this, and then I'll go to Fabiano, whose sound I hope is working. So Amy, let's come to yourself.
Well, I think one thing I'd say to this right now is we are in a moment of radical transparency for the mining sector. This transparency has come too frequently after disasters, to the garment sector. We had transparency needed there, to agriculture, to seafood. It's mining's moment. This is not going to be managed out of a single stakeholder or an industry trade association alone. And these are materials, unlike oil and gas, we're not talking about this peak mining moment that happened. We're talking about increasing pressure on some materials, even as we talk about circular economy, increasing durability of goods and materials retrieval, recycling. We have this increasing pressure in lithium and nickel and cobalt, and as well as iron ore and the aluminium that go into the infrastructure for so many of these things. And so as long as we're all using them, we're complicit in the impacts and trying to say, look, they're all 5-star and AAA when that's just not reality in this moment. It's time for more honest accounting about what are the impacts of industrial scale mining, and how is the full supply chain going to shoulder the cost and the value for improvement in that space. It may be that taking one of a really weak performing mine and bringing it up is a better value for environmental and social responsibility than breaking new ground for a brand new, innovative 5-star AAA mine. In a place where we've already got the jobs, we already have environmental impact. Can we improve in those spaces? So I think the whole idea of what's failing is like, we got a whole bunch of failing. I don't think we have to worry too much about failing, actually, because I think the press is filled with our failures in industrial scale mining right now. We have an opportunity more to take this and succeed. I mean, I'm thinking of Grace Barrasso and ArcelorMittal, who I've heard her come out and say, well, look, we're using the IRMA self-assessment tool to find out where we're failing miserably by chapter, like where are our risk points and how can we address those even before we audit. The question you asked me earlier, Sarah, around tailings. I mean, what a moment to talk about what are our potential consequences and what's our safety commitment and our accountability that we're going to hold decision makers for this risk that's as great as it is. So I think it's a moment to recognize, let's not be afraid of failing because we already failed. We're on our way actually to showing our innovation and improving.
Yeah, no, I love that, Amy. And I think that's something as well where, as you say, actually the sector, and it almost comes back to Marc's first point there about opportunity, is as well as actually, okay, yeah, there's some things have got to stop happening. Okay, it is not appropriate for any more tailings dams to fail. It's not appropriate for us to blow up any more cultural heritage caves, etc. And it's a real shame that we've had to actually have those horrific moments in order to try and instigate this learning. But I think, and Fabiano, I'm going to come to you with this now, is that it's really exciting to say, okay, yeah, we know those areas that we've got to stop doing badly on, but also the reward for areas where we can see that opportunity and do really well on. I think that's coming through, and the likes of Larry Fink with BlackRock, for example, saying, I want to be able to reward the upside as well as rewarding where companies are managing the potential threat that's going on there as well. So we're seeing this sort of balanced scorecard approach coming through. And I know that we've got some talks later on in the week with people saying, okay, cool, how do we look at both the upside and the downside, and what that balancing act in a way looks like. But Fabiano, I know that we will be sharing your full video, which of course got a little bit disrupted with technology issues earlier on in this afternoon. But wow, was there some really positive learning that you shared with us earlier. Do you have any final comments?
Yes, and thank you very much for that. And I think that I'll go back on the words that we've just used right now, the words of failure, the words of risk, and those are always seen with fear, with a problem, not a way to solve things. And that's sometimes I think it's the key to get to the opposite. If we go back to community, and we have examples of that, I'll probably go a little bit with what Epi was saying about water, which is such a great example. It happens in pretty much all mines that we've been exposed to. If you bring the opportunity to the community to participate and to understand the issues that you have, the risks that you have, that can be the easiest key for the solution, because their empirical knowledge, their ancestral knowledge, they understand the topics, even if they're complex, if they're difficult, they will understand if you give them a chance to participate on that. So let's say, for example, that we have a lot of monitoring samples of water being done frequently to understand that the water has the standards and has the amount that it's needed. If you let community participate on the process, be the ones that are seeing the results, being taught how to read those results and participate on finding different solutions, so they can see that everything's being done to solve that risk, probably they'll be the ones, I'm pretty sure they'll be the ones that in the longer run, they'll be defending the project, because they'll say and they'll come and they'll show to everybody, these guys are trying to do the best they can. And because of them, my family has food on their table. I have a job. I have an opportunity to succeed as a person. That's really, really valuable. And never forget, mining has one of the biggest beauties in the industries. We're one of the only industries that can go to remote locations where no one else can go. That farming can go to a high standard. Any other industry can go because they need to be on bigger cities to have the supply chain. Mining has that beauty. You go to those places, you touch the reality of really impoverished communities. That's a beautiful thing.
I think that's a fantastic note there, Fabiano. It is a beautiful thing. And I think every single one of us, and I know that we've got lots of people who perhaps don't just work in mining, they work further down that value chain, exactly as we were hearing earlier on today from Andrew Buchanan, and looking at the Mineral Materials Processing Institute and what can we do with those materials, etc., that we go to all that effort to extract from the ground, how do we recycle them, etc. But for those of us who actually have the privilege of working within the mining sector, wow, are we lucky, because we get to have adventures. We get to go to amazing parts of the world when, of course, we're not constrained by lockdowns, etc. And I think we probably get to engage with some of the most beautiful people as well as landscapes. And all of those should be treasured personally, but also obviously for the future as well. So thank you for that, Fabiano. Marc, I'm going to come back to your wonderful self for your final words of wisdom before we then wrap up.
Sure. I think we always see that there's a strong appetite for cross-training in the mining industry. You know, someone who's a geologist really wants to understand mineral processing. Someone who understands processing wants to understand tailings. There's always this curiosity about, you know, kind of looking up over the fence, what's happening on the other side. And I think that's part of the opportunity here from a cultural standpoint is we talked a lot about systems and complex systems. How do you get people to think about, okay, I'm going to make a decision or an improvement in this area, and yeah, I can see it's going to improve my grade by X%, but what are all the other impacts of that decision? And starting to actually explore that, the system impacts. And I think that might be a way that we can get over this concept of failure and get into a concept of experimentation, just by starting to think about what's happening outside the four walls of the part of the business that you look at, or the part of the plant that you look at. And that might be part of the opportunity in changing culture around this, which I think is what it comes down to.
I really like that, Mark. I think there's that having that curiosity for what's going on round about us, acknowledging where we don't know stuff. So let's go find out or ask someone what their opinion is on it. And then also having respect for those answers that we get back, even if they're not the answers that we want to hear, actually respecting those different perspectives that are perhaps being shared with us. As we heard earlier on today with our Burst the Bubble session, asking people from outside of raw materials, what do you guys reckon? And I know that certainly the comments that we had coming in with, people were finding it really uncomfortable to listen to members of normal society, what they felt about mining. But why was it important for us to listen, acknowledge and absorb that knowledge, and also say thank you for the time that those individuals had given to us in terms of giving us that feedback. So I totally agree with you there, Mark. Now, in terms of cross-learning and training, I have a sneaking suspicion there's something you want to advertise for us.
We are doing a session with Sarah next week, and I invite anybody who's attending to join, and it's an ESG and mining session. And I think that what you all already know is that Sarah beautifully explores the interrelationship between all three of the aspects. And I think that's going to be a critical part of the path forward. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mark. And if anybody is interested in that training course, we've posted the link in the chat. So that is the EduMine training course. Of course, there are other training courses that are running next week as well. And if you want to know any more information about any of them, please do get in touch and we will certainly feed you through that information. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have hit 6:30 UK time. I suspect it's very much wide awake time now on Vancouver Island, Mark, with yourself. Thank you so much to everybody for giving us your time here today and for sharing all of those different perspectives. Just as a reminder and a recap, we started off this afternoon session with the wonderful Scottish Andrew. So you all heard my Scottish accents beginning to appear. So Andrew talking about some of the fantastic research projects, but then also taking that research and really beginning to implement it in terms of how do we recycle those lithium batteries? Okay, how do we actually do that and really act as stewards of all of those raw materials that are so precious to us? We then had a wonderful double act between Fabiano and Monica, who of course were joined by Rubens with his fantastic video. So I really encourage all of you that once we get that video up online, we'll alert everybody, go and watch that video again, and even just zoom forwards to the end where you hear what Rubens actually had to say about conflict and the potential for bribing of local communities, etc., and the true impact that can have within that community, because boy, is that powerful stuff. So really take a good look at that. So thank you very much, Fabiano, Monica, and Rubens, of course, as well. Then, of course, Rob spoke to us about that wonderful difference between complexity and things just being complicated. And what really resonated with me there was that you can't take tools that are designed for the complicated and use them in the world of complexity. Genius. Thank you very much for that. That is something that I will unashamedly be stealing for the future. So thank you very much for that one, Rob. That was brilliant. And then, of course, we had Caroline and Luke talking to us from Kumi, and of course, the world risk map that you guys have developed and you've got. And so that was really excellent. So I encourage everybody to go and take a proper look at the Kumi website and check that one out. Then we heard from Sustainalytics from Dana, one of the world's most respected sustainability indices, and really beginning to get a look underneath the bonnet as to how all of those indices are really pulled together. And then, of course, EPI, which was a truly epic talk that you gave to us there, sir. I will be going back and watching that again and having a proper look at those slides, because there was so much information that you managed to cram into that. So that was just brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And then last but by no means least, of course, Amy giving us that overview with regards to Irma. So as I mentioned, once upon a time, I did work inside Anglo-American, and I remember Irma when it was first getting going, and it's been truly fantastic sitting there on the outskirts every so often, contributing into all of your calls for consultation with the world's community around how do we actually truly make mining responsible. So thank you very much, Amy, for your leadership with regards to the initiative as a whole. And then finally, of course, the wonderful Marc for helping us to pull some of those strands of thoughts together. Brilliant to have you with us as well. So thank you very, very much to our panel. A last round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here today. Last word